Today's Friday, which means we're taking a little break from our normal vocabulary and grammar lessons, and I'm going to share a little bit of a cultural experience I had. Specifically, I want to share with you what my first day in the Ukraine was like. Поехали. Let's go. Всем привет. Меня зовут Jared, я делаю русский язык легким. Hey everybody, my name's Jared and I make the Russian language easy. Before I get started, I want you to keep in mind one thing. I arrived in the Ukraine in March of '92. That was 1 year after the official fall of communism. Communism officially fell in 1991. Even though Ukraine was its own independent country, it was largely still heavily influenced by Russia. The ruble was still its main currency. It was soon to switch to the kupony, and now it's on grivny. Most everyone was still speaking Russian. Ukrainian is now the primary dialect there. And their standard of living and their way of life was still what I would say was very close to how they were living under the communist regime there. That's not how they're living today. So this was my experience back in '92. Keeping that in mind, let's go ahead and I want to share with you what it was like. And as we go along and as I share this, I'm going to give you some Russian words, maybe help you increase your vocabulary a little bit. So if you want to jot those down and memorize them later, great. If you just want to enjoy the video for what it is Friday. You can take the day off. All right. My first memory was когда мы приземлились, when we landed. Я помню, что аэропорт был так пустой. I remember that the airport was so empty. We landed and there were no other planes at the airport. There were no people waiting to greet the airplane. And it just felt quiet and empty. And you know, if you've been to most any other airport, you know it's just hustle and bustle and full of movement, you know, and efficiency, and everybody's trying to get you in that plane and out as fast as they can. Was not like that there. It was quiet and empty. So our plane was fairly full. We all unloaded, and then we went into the actual airport building. And I can remember I was with a group of about 7 or 8 people, and most of them had already gone through customs before me. I think there was like me and maybe 1 or 2 other people behind me. From my group. I went up and I showed my passport, and, you know, the gentleman behind this glass wall is looking through my documents there. And then he kind of looks up at me and he says, "Ну хорошо, деньги?" He's like, "Okay, your money?" And we had to pay $50. I don't remember what for part of a visa or whatever. It was probably more likely a bribe, of взятка. A bribe, that's a good word to know. But I'd already given him my $50 and I didn't have any more cash on me. That's all I had. I knew I had to get in the country. And I can remember thinking, this is the first time I really need my Russian language to really communicate something important. And I'm sure it was the worst accent ever, but I just said, "У вас есть мои деньги?" I went kind of slow and put it all out there and make sure I was enunciating. And he just kind of looked at me. He's like, "Oh, ну хорошо." He's like, "Oh, okay." And then he let me through. Now, thinking back on this, I'm wondering if he's like, "Yeah, I got your money to pay to the government, but now I want you to pay me so that you can get in." But I didn't have it, and I wasn't clued into that sort of goings on at that time there. So anyways, he let me in and I got through. Our group went over to where we were all supposed to meet. We had a meal. We did all that. The next most significant thing I can remember is they paired us up with somebody who'd already been in the country for a long time and knew the language really well. And so we were in groups of 2. We called them companions. My companion there, we went outside. We had my luggage outside the apartment. We had my luggage and we were up on the top of this little hill, and the hill went down and he stuck his arm out just like this. Can you see that okay? And he was kind of, I'm going to move over a little bit so you can see that he's just kind of waving his fingers like this a little bit each time a car passed. And the cars would pass, but every now and then they would pull over and he would go up to the window and they would do a little discussion. And I was like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Oh, I'm getting a taxi." I was like, "Oh, I didn't know that how they, you know, in America, you'd hold out your thumb, and taxi's not really a common form of transportation, especially in the city, right? That's normally something you see on the highway. But in Ukraine, they did this all the time. They would just stick their hand out and just any Joe Blow driver would pull over and say, "Hey, where are you going?" And if they were going in roughly the same direction, we would just договориться, negotiate a price of how much it would be to take us there. Now, if we needed to go this way and they were actually going that way, you just say, "Okay, you know, forget it, thanks, bye," unless they really wanted the money. But 9 times out of 10, it worked. And they'd be like, "Okay." And they'd be like, "Oh, I'll take you for, you know, whatever it was, 2, 3, 4, 500 kupony or ruble, whatever we were charging at the time." And so it was kind of interesting. I remember we get in these маленькая машина. We get in this small little car, all the Russian cars. And I know that they've all converted over to kind of current cars now. But back at that time, in Russian type, they were just so small. They were just these tiny little things. And we barely fit my 2 suitcases in the trunk, and off we went. And we drove for 10, 15 minutes. I was looking at all the streets and the buildings and all of that. And when we got to the dome where we live, and I talked about dome previously in another video, I'll link to what a dome is up here if you don't know what that is. But I can remember всё было темно, но в то же самое время было видно. Это мне было странно. Я не могу объяснить, как это было. It was really weird, but it was dark. It was night. I think it was probably, 9 o'clock, something like that. And it was dark, but at the same time, everything was lit. You could see everything. It was strange to me. And I remember one thing that was weird to me, or new to me, I shouldn't say weird, but new, is that the domes we were in, there were like 4 of them. There was the long dome apartment building where we lived here. There's another one there, and then there were another 2 here. It kind of made like a little courtyard. And in the center of this courtyard was just like a play area. They had little kids play area, and they had big trees, and that was very typical over there. You saw that a whole bunch. And I liked it. I thought that was really kind of cool. So we went through the podъезд. Again, if you don't know what that podъезд is, it's like the entryway into the apartment building. It's in that same linked video there. We went up the stairs, and I can remember перед дверью были цветы. And in front of the door, there were some flowers. And this little Russian girl, I forget how old she was, maybe 7 or 8, she'd kind of fallen in love with this American, my companion there. And so she would always leave flowers on the doorstep. And I remember he was frustrated. He's like, oh, почему она так делает? He's like, why does she do that? I was like, what's wrong with that? He's like, well, I've told her that, that one, there's an age difference. She's 7 or 8 year old, but he's from America, and, nothing was going to happen there. And I was like, I thought it was kind of cute and sweet that this little Russian girl was leaving flowers in front of the door. But he, for some reason, was a little bothered by it. But I remember that my very first night there. I can remember it was a small little apartment. On the right was the vannaya, or the bathroom. And za vanной, behind the bathroom, was the kuchnia, the kitchen. И перед ванной, in front of the bathroom, was the main room. I don't really, do they call that a zal? But it's like the living room there. We never refer to that in Russia. I don't even know if I know that word. That's interesting. I'll have to go look that up. I think they might just call it a zal, but a zal's kind of big and grandiose. Anyways, it was the living room. On the left was the spalnaya. On the left was the bedroom where we slept. And I can remember there were 2 beds, and what they were is they were couches where the back of the couch had folded down, and that's what you would sleep on. And they did that a lot because over there they would have 1 or no bedrooms. And so to accommodate the 1 or 2 children families, if there was a bedroom, mom and dad would usually get that. And then the kids, they would just fold down the couch at night, and they would sleep on that couch, and then fold it back up during the day so they can have more of a living accommodation there. That's my first memories of the Ukraine. I hope you find that kind of interesting. I know it's totally different over there. That was in Kiev. I didn't reference that before. I probably should have. I stayed there for 2 months, and then I actually moved over to Donetsk and another little city called Gorlovka, and I lived there for about 8 or 10 months. And then I went to Dnipropetrovsk and Kharkov. Was I anywhere else? No, those are the 4 cities that I was in. I love the Ukraine. It's a great country. The people are so generous and so loving and so smart and so, I want to use the word deep. There's a lot to them. There's a lot to get to know. So when this whole fiasco that's going on there right now because of Putin, when that ends, I hope you get the chance to go over to Russia and or Ukraine. You'll love it. If you liked the video, and I hope you did, I hope it wasn't a waste of your time, give me a like. I also want to encourage you to subscribe to the channel if you're interested in learning Russian. On Monday, I do vocabulary. On Wednesdays, I do grammar. And then on Fridays, I try to keep it a little light. Something usually cultural or historical or something along those lines there. So subscribe to the channel so that you can get updates that way. Ну хорошо, это все. Спасибо и увидимся.